Hello and welcome to the latest series of podcasts from Space to Be Human. We've renamed our podcast as the Emergence Room. And the reason we've done that is because we're really interested in allowing conversations to happen naturally and for learning and insights and reflections to happen in a way that is a bit more emergent as opposed to a way that is very defined. If you're used to podcasts that are short, sharp and snappy, this is going to be slightly different. What we invite you to do is to relax, sit down with a cup of tea or a cup of coffee, or plug in your headphones, go for a walk with the dog, or go out on your bike, or listen to it while you're driving, and allow the conversation to wash over you. Invite the insights and the learning that may be relevant for you to appear. When we start these conversations in the emergence room, we're not sure where they're going to go. We will provide a little bit of narration just to help you steer or find your way through the conversation, but we're not going to over-edit or take lots of stuff out. We're going to let it be as it is. The first in this new series of the emergence room is a conversation with Evelyn and myself, so the co-hosts, where we're just going to introduce this idea of the things that won't leave us. So the things that have remained part of our lives from as long as we can remember, and they just won't go away.
It's nice to be in this room with you again, Rob. It's been a little while.
It has.
We're here launching our new series for the Emergence Room. And maybe for our listeners, as the Emergence Room, we're often exploring the stories that shape our lives. And in previous series, we have looked at where those stories sometimes come from. So whether they might come from family upbringing, the cultural setting that we grow up in. And in this series, we're actually doing something really interesting, I think, because we're kind of looking down at the root at some of the things that won't leave us, that seem to have been with us always and are less maybe externally forged into our lives. And I get to be the lucky person who has a conversation with just Rob in the room today. Because Rob, it was just yesterday, it was your 61st birthday. And I think my opening question for you is, if you hear that question around what is the thing that doesn't leave you, what's the thing that's been around for you throughout most or all of those years, how would you begin to answer that question?
I find it really interesting because I go two ways. We're trying to maybe look at for the stuff that is like an inherent part of us as opposed to that was created by sort of circumstance. And I find that quite hard to discern and fully know. But there are a couple of things, probably two or three things that come up. One is a sense of justice. I think that I can remember from really, really, really young, and that's stayed with me. It's a sense of justice. One of the things I can't seem to let go of is I can't let go of asking questions. Questions that challenge the assumptions that we have about how we live or why we live the way that we do. I think I've always done that, even really young at school, and questioning school systems and getting myself into trouble at school with teachers and stuff for asking questions about the school system. But I think there is something about this fairness, this justice, and there is something about questions and curiosity about why we live the way that we do. I think those are two things that, however hard I try and not ignore them, but just say, I wonder if I could experience life a little bit without them. I find that it just doesn't seem to work. They just appear very naturally. And it's not like there's a trigger. It's not like I'm always triggered about it. They are there. I see something. And I just feel like I respond to it. Sometimes there are specific moments that stay with us, that remind us or point towards these constants in our lives. And Evelyn, at this point in the conversation, invites me to tell the story of one of these moments.
I'm reminded, and I know that I'm steering because I know you a little bit, so I'm reminded of a beautiful story that you told when you were once hitchhiking, I believe, about this, coming to this understanding around this asking questions, this pivotal moment where you had this somewhat of a revelation, like, oh, this is a thing for me,
Mm.
like almost like you see yourself from the outside in. Do you want to describe what happened there?
I can still have such a visceral memory of it, physically and emotionally. So I used to hitchhike quite a lot. In the UK, people used to hitch a lot. So you'd end up at a motorway roundabout and there'd be like 10 people in a row waiting for their turn to, with their thumb out waiting for a lift. I was hitching from Bristol, a city in the south of England, back to my hometown where my parents were, to visit them for the weekend. And I'd had quite a lot of interesting experiences hitching, because you never know who's going to pick you up. And, there's those times when you always do a bit quick recce when you get in the car. Am I going to be safe? And so, there is that bit. And I never had any really difficult things. But this particular one, I just got in the car and we had this amazing conversation just about life, because you're getting into a space, an enclosed space with someone for an hour and a half who you will probably never meet again in their life or in your life. I can remember getting out of this car and thinking, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. I want to spend the rest of my life having conversations with people about their lives and sharing stories about our lives. And it was really powerful experience. And every now and then I pinch myself and I think, wow, Rob, that's what you've done. When I must have been about 20. So for the remaining 41 years, that is what I've done. I have created spaces for myself and for others to share stories about life and to understand their stories more. It's good to reflect on it, actually, because out of all of the stories of my life, that's the one that I think, something happened in that moment about this is who I am and this is what I want to be.
And how does that sit alongside this, the other thing around justice, and how's that sort of woven a thread throughout your life? And those two things, do they converge? Do they come together for you?
I think they have a slightly different flavor, actually. The storytelling one, the listening to stories, feels like a much more light, joyful thing, whereas the unfairness and injustice, it is probably a little bit of a triggered thing. If something in me gets touched, that is specific to my own history, that then leads me into responses and behaviors. It probably brings in another bit that just won't go away. When I hear about injustice and unfairness, the bit that I wish would go away sometimes is I just want to go and do something about it. I want to step in. And sometimes I've learned the hard way that that's not always the best thing to do. One of the things that I can do sometimes is polarize my experiences. So I can say, I experienced one thing in my life, and that's different from this other thing that I experienced in my life. And at this point in our conversation, Evelyn invites me to see how these two things that have stayed with me all my life, how they may relate to each other.
From the outside looking in and having had, the pleasure of knowing you professionally, I would like to invite you into an exploration of maybe those two things actually do coexist in the thread of your life. Because I think about the stories of you, sort of activist moments with Extinction Rebellion, but also the work that you do with young people or have done with young people, the places you choose to bring facilitated conversation, essentially, are related to places where maybe injustice is a thread. Do you see that?
I wonder if there's an order of what happens. So I think there's quite an unconscious invite to the stuff around injustice and unfairness. And I think that's always that conscious. Whereas the I want to listen to people. I want to hear their stories. Is quite a conscious. Oh yeah, I love that. So for Extinction Rebellion, for example, there's the story of nature and our relationship with this planet, which has always been important to me. And then something draws me in. And then it's not until I'm really engaged in it that I suddenly realize, actually, this is a thing of justice. There's all thing around climate justice. So I think there are some things that I unconsciously, I don't know, get invited into, which I don't realize it is about that thing. So, for example, with young people, my primary thing when I was working with young people was to support young people to find a way through their current experience of life, whether that was homelessness or whether they were in prison or out of work or whatever it was. And then I think underneath, unconsciously, what I then meet is the injustice of the system. And then something else kicks in for me, which feels very different. I feel a rage that kicks in then at that point, and I'm still working out if that rage is about my own experiences or it's how would you describe it? I don't mean this in a religious sort of phrase, but like a holy rage. Do you know what I mean? It's a justified rage, whereas opposed to it's just a rage because something in me's been touched because of what has happened to me in the past.
I want to circle back to the rage in a second because I think it's really interesting, and I'd like to have an exploration with you around that sort of energy, how we might interpret that or use that in our lives. And I also want to just say that when I listen to your story, what appears for me is like, oh, but you're giving people a voice who may not otherwise regularly have a voice. You're the kind of person that will stop and speak to somebody who's homeless, and you'll give them a voice. So that it feels like you are picking up on something around which people in the world, or even the planet, so which beings in the world are not being heard.
It's really interesting. I think I probably make the assumption about myself that the voices that I want to make heard are the excluded or the whatever language you want to use around about the unheard voices. And sometimes I realize it's not quite that clean cut. I've got a really good friend of mine who actually has been on this podcast, Philip Roderick, who died a couple of weeks ago. And I worked with him a lot in a contemplative community, and he was the founder. He was the founding member of it. And I can remember I facilitated a weekend for all of the members of the community. We did a big circle, and in this circle, I made sure that everybody, every single person of the community had voice. And it took a while. We really had to slow down and just give people space. And everybody had a voice. And Philip was outraged with me because I wouldn't give him a voice at that particular time. And I said, this is about the community. It's not about you as the founder today. And he was outraged. Do you know what I mean? Sometimes it's just about who in this particular context needs to be heard at this time. I think there's something really interesting, and I've just started to notice it, that it's not just about an exclusion or a downtrodden or an unheard voice. It's just at this moment, who is it important that is heard and who maybe needs not to be given a voice at this time.
Mhm.
And that becomes problematic when you say to someone, actually, you can't talk today. Earlier in our conversation, I'd mentioned about rage. Evelyn invited me to explore that a little bit more. Where does that rage come from? How do I use it? How do I use it creatively? So we started having a little bit of a conversation about my experience when doing some environmental activism with Extinction Rebellion. And I hadn't expected to be talking about this, but we had this interesting exploration around this idea of rage and love and how do they work together.
Should we circle back to the rage thing? Because I'm curious about how that works for you, because you're exploring, what the source of the rage is and maybe why you're experiencing it. But I'm also curious, what do you do with the rage? Rage is a really interesting sensation or emotion, at least here in the West, so to speak. We have done something with rage, which is about something that needs to be contained, something that otherwise could have a potential like aggressive outlet. as opposed to seeing it as the fire of activation, the
Mm.
fire of determination. And I'm just curious about your own relationship to it.
That's really funny. I do think I'd be talking a lot about Extinction Rebellion because I had a mixed relationship with them because that hard edge of activism is an uncomfortable place to be in. They used to have a phrase called love and rage. And I, over the years, found that more and more helpful about these two things that can sit together, love and rage. In Extinction Rebellion's case, it's the love of nature, it's the love of the natural world, although I would question it's probably love of our lifestyle that was most important, but that's another conversation that we could have. But there is something around the love. There's a love of something, and then when that is threatened, there is a rage about it. Yeah. And then if you look at it the other way, there's a rage at an injustice or something that's happening that shouldn't be. And actually, if we can somehow allow love to almost cushion our rage, I think our rage can turn into something that is more helpful. And for me, I come from a family where there was a lot of anger. So I've always had quite a dance around, is it okay to express anger? And how do you express anger? And I think for me, I've learned a little bit to separate a little bit. Actually, I feel angry about something. I'm triggered by something, or something gets a response in me, which is slightly differently for me because my rage tends to appear mainly when there's something about a mismanagement or a misappropriation of power and position. That's when my rage kicks in. And I think I've learned to channel it better because I used to get, I think I would really quickly move to everything is wrong with the system. Everything is wrong with a person who is, misappropriating their position or their power. And I've realized that it's a much more nuanced than that. And I think my rage can be more pinpointed towards the actual injustice as towards the person. There is something in our system that allows or encourages injustice. And that's what I get. That's where my rage goes now more as opposed to individuals. And I think that really helps me. And also sometimes I think I'm scared of my own rage. I'm scared of the power of it. And the fire, you mentioned fire, probably sometimes I have a fear around the fire of it. What would it be like for me to step into that rage and allow it to speak? I used to do a lot of leadership training for leaders in local authority, so the councils or the local municipals, depending on what language you use. And we were doing stuff around leadership styles and approaches, and every now and then I'd feel a rage in me, the bad leadership or the poor leadership or the leadership that seemed to be separated from ethics and morality and wanting the good for other people. And I would ask permission of the group. I would say, hey, do you mind if I just go off on a little rant for 20 minutes? And it wouldn't be like a slagging people off. But there would be a rage in me about, we are doing something that's really unhelpful in the way that we lead people and organizations. And I want to say something about it. And people were always really grateful. They would say, I really love it when you step into that because there is a fire that comes in. And I think I've probably been cautious about it a lot in the past. And I think I'm probably still in the process of learning about letting that rage out. I do it in my music. I think I'm getting better at expressing. There's a rage about things in the way that I play, in the way that I sing, and what I write about. It's a way of putting that rage out into the world without turning it onto other people. Because I think that's when it gets a bit weird. It becomes something else when we turn it on someone. Man, interesting question.
Hmm. Interesting exploration. So I'm curious, if you're sitting in the seat of, okay, you're 61 and a day old.
You're going to keep reminding me of how old I am.
I just wanted to look ahead. How do you feel in relationship to this, sense of justice and the conversations? And is there I guess, a form of that you're curious about exploring? And maybe that's also connected to your rage. Like you've just mentioned your music and how you're maybe feeling more free to express yourself with a little bit of rage in your music and the way you play or the way you sing. But are there other elements of that in the exploration of the things that won't leave you that you're curious to explore and experiment with?
I think at this moment, I'm a little bit surprised that I hadn't already mentioned my music and my writing as one of those things that won't leave me. I started writing songs and performing when I was 13 or 14. So I was a little bit taken back that I hadn't mentioned it. I think it's really interesting listening to you just reflect back a thing around the music and and the singing. I think that part of me is something that will not leave. And I think I've quieted it down over the years for various reasons, but that creativity. And I've realized that my use of words, whether that's written word or within song, is a really useful way for me to communicate that rage. The one thing that I've always experienced about myself is I don't have a fear of being publicly vulnerable. And that's not like I'm want to draw attention to myself. It's like I don't have a fear about it. I have an intrinsic belief that it's okay to be vulnerable. And by doing that in front of groups and even when I'm, performing, is something that is helpful for me and it's helpful for others. So I think there's something about continuing to work out as I go into the next 30 years, these things have almost circled back. So, when I was 15, 16, I was always writing songs. I was writing a lot of poetry. I can remember at the age of 14, someone saying to me, because I was telling some stories about my school life or something, and they said, "Oh, you should write a book." And that there are things that have never left me. Those things about creativity and writing and wordsmanship have never left me. And I wonder, I think at this point in my life, that part of me has really re-emerged and has said, hey, at times in life, you've kept me a little bit quiet and I don't want to be quiet anymore. I want you to talk about your rage or your passion and your vulnerability out in the world. And I think that's the invite for me, is to do more of that.
I'm getting this beautiful image of you as if we would just look at it as sort of energy, as a river flowing, almost like, okay, the conversation and the giving voice is like your focal point as the point of expression, whether that be through music or poetry or conversation in a car with someone or a facilitated conversation in a contemplative community. And then there is this, what you call rage, but I wonder if it's also aliveness, right?
Mm.
It's also passion. Because I think passion and rage are so close together. It's the fire of our lives. It's the things that we feel like make matter to us, like they make a difference. They're important to us, right? I think that's why love and rage does make sense to me intuitively, because I think, yeah, why would you be rageful about something that doesn't matter to you, that doesn't appear? Rage is pointing you in the direction of meaning for you. And so I see your, like, the river of your life is like this energy of fire, rage, passion, and then the outlet of where it needs to go, whose voice needs to be heard now. And I wonder if a long time also you were oriented towards, giving voice to other people, and you sort of circled back to, what about my voice?
What has begun to emerge in this conversation is sometimes the dance between those natural things, those inherent things, those innate things that won't leave us, and then also the stories that other people tell us, and how these two things sometimes can jar against each other or influence each other. That is definitely the shift. And actually, it's been a slow burning shift for me because, when we talk about in an earlier series, we talk about the almost like the stories that shape our lives. I have a really strong family story about always put other people before you, always put other people's needs before yours. And it's such a strong story that at times I realize that there are bits of me that want to live in the world, and I've squashed them. So actually, it's an ongoing journey to right. I want to retell that story about actually I have a voice in the world, and I want to have that voice in the world. Yeah, that's definitely the journey that I'm on. Definitely the journey.
It's really lovely because I'm starting to see that, those things that will never leave you, they still sit underneath those stories that the world places on you, in your case, the very strong family story. Wasn't that you didn't then do the thing about conversation or justice. It just took a different shape and, it starts to maybe mold itself more and more to who you are as we get older or as you continue on the path of discovery. That's lovely.
I'm aware as a human, sometimes what I can do is get fixed in my own way of doing things. And I think this part of the conversation really encouraged me to start looking at what do others do? And it invited curiosity in me about how do others do this? How do others express their rage or their sense of injustice in the world? It's funny because I'm fascinated about watching others, and sometimes those others are my own children, and watching how they express their rage or their sense of injustice in the world, because they all do. So I think I'm a bit more curious about, how do others do this? How do others do it? What's their response and the acts of kindness that they bring into places of injustice or unfairness or and I think I'm trying to learn from other people. How do other people do this? Not because I want to copy someone else, but just like, all right, this finding voice for myself or finding ways to bring myself into the world in a way that relates to these things that won't leave me. I think I'm trying to do a bit of experimentation. So I was at a gig on Saturday night where two singer-songwriters were on a little tour. One of them had released a little album. And I was watching them thinking, man, I could learn from you because you've set yourself this little tour with an album that you've self-released and you're just going around playing around different art centres in the country. And there weren't many people at this gig where we were, and it's in a small town in Dartmoor. I was thinking, man, there's something I can learn about that because I can wait for it to be right as opposed to, just do it. I hadn't expected Evelyn to mention the poetry book that is being released soon, that I've written recently. I was a little taken back, but it led us into an interesting exploration around the difference between allowing other people to have voice and using my own voice, and the power of using my own voice.
I know that you have a poetry book coming out soon. How does it feel that that is part of your voice that will be out in the world? How do you feel in the sort of expectation of it being released?
Oh, I'm really excited about it being released. Really excited. I think the bit that I struggle with is like the whole. Well, how do I promote it? Do you know what I mean? And all that old promotion and telling people about it. I don't know whether it's just a shy thing. I think that's part of the learning for me. Is like I'm excited about it. I'm also aware that sometimes for me the process of doing something is really important, and actually a finished product isn't always as important. And I'm trying to make sure that I know I want to honor this thing that I finished and present it out into the world. And so I'm having interesting conversations about doing a little launch with some people, and I think that's my learning. The creativity bit will happen naturally. It does, on a daily basis. I'm writing something, but it's the learning bit for me is about, and how do I honor that and put it out in the world?
What would you say the power is of using your own voice in the world? So maybe in comparison almost to the hitchhike story, or, I know that you have stories about you get on a train and you watch what somebody's reading and you ask a question about the book. And the conversation starts maybe from the curiosity about somebody else or the person that you're in the room with. And I wonder what's the difference in what gets instigated by using your own voice? in the world.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that's shifting. I, this is where it gets a bit blurry between, these things that won't leave us and how much they were shaped by our experiences. Been the youngest of four boys in a family with quite a dad with strong values who was very clear on what was right and wrong for him. I think I found it hard to have voice. Do you know what I mean? So I wonder sometimes whether, alongside the curiosity for people, my desire to give other people voice is always been a bit of a projection of that, because that's what I wanted for myself. And it's not that I don't have voice, because I have had, but I think there is this. It's almost like there's something turning that actually, it's the other side of the coin, and the other side of the coin needs to be flipped over. As I mentioned at the beginning, these conversations are emergent, and this conversation took a bit of a turn actually into somewhere I hadn't anticipated, and an exploration of storytelling in the world, and how do we create spaces for people to tell stories. And so we go off on a sly little tangent for a few minutes. We end up at a place where we're talking about form and the formless. I hope you'll join us. I wonder what the world would be like if we were able to tell our stories more, of just what it was like to be alive, and to be heard, and to be honoured, and to be valued for our life stories. When I worked as a therapist, people would just say, just the telling of the story of something that happened to me I feel lighter. I've been seeing therapists all my life. Well, all my life. I did wait a few years before I began. But about 25, 26 onwards, I've always been seeing either a therapist or a supervisor or some mentor. That for me gives me this space to tell my story and explore it. And I was talking to a current person I'm working with. We were talking about how it's almost like a sad indictment on our societies that we need to pay people to give us space to tell our story. What's happened that's meant that we've lost that as an inherent societal happening? What have we done that we have, I've had an experience and I need to get paid to listen to someone. And we were laughing about the fact that actually, therapists and coaches were all just prostitutes, really. People just pay for our time. That's all it is. And I think for me, it's an indictment of our society. So by actually saying, I will tell my story out in the world, I think is almost an invite to other people to do the same. Tell your story out in the world. Don't wait until, something's difficult, or just tell your story. Tell it. That's what we are. However our origins, we seem to have developed as a storytelling people. We tell stories, and we love to tell stories. So I think that, the reason I want to do it partly is about it's an invite for others to do the same. It's okay to tell our stories. Maybe that's all we have. That's all we have in life, really, is our stories.
I'm going to share a reflection of mine on that in a second, but I do think it's important to be a little bit mindful of the assumption that, we used to be able to share vulnerably with people in our community, and now we pay for it. Because I think that we don't know. And maybe we have just slotted that also into the economic model, which has become sort of the central functioning model of our societies. But I'm reminded of, for example, I think it's in Japan, where there are, secret sort of men's clubs where men go, but what they really do is they just have a moment where they have a woman who listens, asks questions, and things that they cannot do within their own relationship because, culturally as well, it's a culture that really doesn't talk vulnerably, openly to each other. I think there's something really interesting about conversation and voice that almost goes deeper than just the act of storytelling. And it's something that I've started to understand over the last couple of years more clearly than ever before. I wonder if voice is the first form that we have with which we make what is internally going on for us, which is a bundle of, I don't know, neuroreceptors, hormones, energies, we call it emotions or thoughts, right? And we make it material, we bring it out. And when we bring it out, it is almost like then we can see it more clearly. Then we have a little bit of distance between the whirlpool of stuff that is happening for us internally and what it looks like when we look at it from the outside in. For me, I've started to realize that that is the only way that sometimes I can truly understand or almost sift through the noise, sift through the mess of, okay, what is just sort of like, "Blah," and it needs to come out, and what's the real essence here? Like, what's really important about this? Or what is it really that I want to land on? What's the insight? For me, that feels like that's the essential importance of having voice and having a vulnerable place to speak is how else do we learn about what is happening for us internally? And I wonder if that's also the function and the power of art and creativity, and it always has been, is that it's almost like we can only start to understand ourselves by creating something that is outside of ourselves and then having a moment of, oh, what do I feel when I look at this thing now? How do I feel when I hear this thing now? How does it resonate back to me? Does that make sense?
I don't know if this is the right phrase, but for me, it's something about what happens when, for a moment, because it's only for a transient moment, we concrete something. We make something a bit more concrete or a bit more
Yeah.
we allow it to have form in the world, which then, for a fleeting moment, allows us to see something different about it because
Yeah.
it has some form, and then it disappears again. But actually, for that moment, we see something different.
And sometimes it doesn't disappear. And I mean, that was the second part of when I was listening to you. I do agree with you, the power of using your voice out in the world. And I love the invitation of doing that. And I also think that it's important to honor that there are many occasions in which it has been unsafe for people to use their voice or risky to use their voice, like really seriously risky. And so for me, there's also the importance of what is it like to create safe spaces for voices to be
Mm.
heard, where it is about giving the formless form for a moment, but where whatever form you've put that in doesn't get used. It doesn't, people aren't hung up on, well, you said this in a particular way and now we were just hold it over your head for the rest of your life, which happens lots with social media, which happens lots in our political conversations, which then aren't really conversations because we're not allowing for the space for something to evolve, for a person to evolve by, I've now spoken this and then I can evolve, then I can grow. We're not seeing the nature of the function of conversation, I think.
Mm. That sounds like really pertinent for much of the stuff that's going on in the world at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's really funny when we talk about safe spaces. I think quite often, there's there can be a misunderstanding of when we say, "Oh, it's safe to talk here," that means I won't feel uncomfortable, as opposed
Oh,
to,
yeah.
no, a space where we can feel uncomfortable in the sharing of our voice. But like you're saying, we're not going to get punished for it. We're not going to get
Yeah.
get shut down. Our voice will be heard.
Yeah. It'll be heard and it'll be held in relativity almost. Okay, you've said this thing, but I'm not going to call you up next week and say, well, you said that thing that one
Mm.
time. And
That's a painful experience. That is.
it is. And I think that's what invites people to shut down their
Mm.
voice, doesn't it? At least it has for me very strongly.
As we move into the final part of our conversation, you just briefly think a little bit about how we can fan the flames of these things that won't leave us. How do we give them fuel so they can continue to burn? It's always useful for me to be reminded of these things that won't go, they're always just going to stay around. Because then I feel like, actually, my job is not to stop them. It's just to fuel them a little bit. How can a little bit of air get to that flame? What's the air that I need to give it, the oxygen that I need to give it so it can burn? Because it's there. It's not going to go away. I haven't got to create it. It's just, how do I give it space? As we come to the end of our conversation, we always like to leave an invite for you, an experiment. So I think we'd like to invite you to think about the things in your own life that you've kept returning to. They won't go away. You keep finding them in new ways. It's almost like you circle around them and you circle back to them. So just take some time just to find what they are. They may be something that from childhood, from when you were really young, that just keeps coming back. And sometimes what we don't do is we don't give it fuel. We don't allow it to burn. So maybe those are the two parts of the experiment or the invitation. One is to think about those things that you keep circling back to, the things that will not go away, and then invite yourself to consider, how can I give them some fuel?
Beautiful. Thank you. Really enjoyed our conversation this morning. And I'm curious about the next 30 years of your life.
Me too. As we mentioned briefly in the podcast, I'm really excited to announce that I've got a book published. It's called Moving Parts, and it's a collection of poems. I'm going to leave you with one of the poems at the end of this episode, and we will leave a link to a platform where you can purchase a copy in the notes. So enjoy. Soon I will leave. I have for far too long been captured by the logos of uncertain certainties, have been covertly caressed by open secrets, and unlovingly conditioned by unconditional love. I welcome this chaotic doubt. I invite this sacred blasphemy of non-belief, because soon I will be leaving. At the genesis of all things, I saw mystery demystified. In the mistold stories of the carpenter, I saw radical stories carved into comfortableness. In the quashing of a holy rebellion, I witnessed the conversion of beautiful anarchy to stately collusion. I welcome this chaotic doubt. I invite this sacred blasphemy of non-belief, because soon I will be leaving.